Before we jump into this podcast, let's just have a first word from our sponsors, NordVPN, the fastest VPN in the world and an absolute essential travelling companion. You can use NordVPN on 10 devices with just one account, easily switching your virtual location to access apps and websites in other countries. But if you're out of the country, make sure that you've got NordVPN to be able to use your subscriptions and watch the live sport that you might miss. If you're at home, use it to see if you can save money with products that might be cheaper in another region. Go to nordvpn.com/Manchester to get 4 extra months on the 2-year plan. The link is also in the podcast description.
Hello and welcome to the Manchester's Red podcast brought to you by the Manchester Evening News. I'm Jack Flintham and I'm joined today by Steve Railston. Steve, how are we?
Very good, Jack. A little bit under the weather, but I'm boxing on as usual. I'm actually looking forward to tonight, obviously the press conference this afternoon, and I've prepped some homemade doner kebabs. I'm not really a doner kebab man, but there's been a recipe going viral, I think, on different platforms. So I've decided to prep it and give it a pop, but it's currently marinated in the fridge. So I'll take those out later and hopefully cook up a storm. I've come up with a few different kitchen stories in the last few weeks, so there's another. I'll deliver the outcome on Monday's podcast as to how those kebabs were. I'm expecting big things.
If you go missing, I presume you'll be on MasterChef or the likes, won't you? Is it the air fryer recipe? I have seen that one going around.
Yeah, I think you can put them in the air fryer, but I'm going to pop them in the oven. Maybe finish them off with a bit of crisp in the air fryer. But it's basically lamb mince, a bit of beef mince, 70-30 ratio, a bit of onion weaved through, different herbs and spices. So if you listen to this on a Friday afternoon, a Friday evening, that might send tongues back in. You might order a good kebab.
That might be a pitch for the new premium platform.
It's a lot healthier. A lot healthier than the takeaway stuff.
Yes, definitely. Well, it's been another busy week at Manchester United, and we'll get on to the game on Sunday in the second half. But first, we'll take a look at the news that's coming out of Old Trafford. And first up is the news about Kyle McCauley joining Manchester United. Now, this is an appointment for the scouting department, and it's pretty critical role, isn't it, Steve?
Yeah, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I knew who Kyle McCauley was before this week's news, but he's joining the club to work as the new head of senior scouting. Christopher Vivell, who obviously joined United on a temporary basis last year and was permanently appointed as director of recruitment in February, has been looking for someone to fill in that role for a few months now. It emerged in the summer that this position would be created at United. So Kyle McCauley set to come in. And it's interesting when you look at his career because he's worked heavily with Graham Potter. He first met Potter in Östersund. So that relationship developed from there. He then went to Swansea City, across to Brighton and Chelsea. So he's followed Potter around. He was more recently at West Ham, and that's why Kyle McCauley was available, because Graham Potter was sacked in October from West Ham, and McCauley went out the door with him. So he was available to work, but by all accounts, it was a competitive hiring process, and he's going to have a big part in scouting, naturally, as his title would suggest, the new head of senior scouting. And it's been interesting because Vivell has obviously been empowered to kind of oversee the scouting network since coming into the club, and he has streamlined it. United had a lot of scouts. I mean, they've had a lot of employees in a lot of different departments, which is why Sir Jim Ratcliffe wanted to cut costs and make changes, and the scouting department was no different. There was a review, and there was the employee count was too high. So Vivell is overseeing that change. And it's interesting as well that I think the club's use of data is changing. Obviously, Kyle McCauley was at Brighton, and during that period, they signed the likes of Matoma. I'm trying to think who else. Get it up. There's some really great signings. Caicedo, who obviously United were interested in themselves, they turned down that move because of an agent fee, and Mark Cucurella. So, I mean, you could probably go on, couldn't you? There was a lot of great signings during that period. I would be careful and say I wouldn't exactly look at Kyle McCauley and credit him a lot with that, because we all know Tony Bloom, who is the Brighton chairman, he's a bit of a magician. He's got his secret data machine at the Amex Stadium that's kept under wraps. It's very private what goes on there with the data, but they are at the forefront of data in football, essentially, Brighton. And you've seen that with Hearts and Tony Bloom coming in up in Scotland. He's identified an opportunity there with Scotland and Rangers kind of slacking, and he's come in at Hearts and he's already made some clever signings using that data model. So United's data approach was probably behind where it should be. That is changing. It's now very, very intrinsically linked with all transfers at Old Trafford. We saw that in the summer when Benjamin Sesko was announced. The club noted his strong numbers, and Jason Wilcox praised his data when on the press release and kind of the numbers he'd recorded over the last few years in Germany. And the same with Senna Lommans. That was absent from the press release, but privately, and what was discussed with us as journalists was Lommans' post-shot XG, which it might sound a bit hipster, it might sound a bit trendy, but it essentially means it looks at how many shots a goalkeeper has saved compared to what a quote-unquote ordinary goalkeeper would save. And Lommans had kind of stopped 14 extra shots. So he ranked very high. And interestingly enough, when I spoke to a coach from Bruges about Lommans' development, he said Lommans has always recorded strong numbers. And in their in-house metrics, even from when he was a teenager, he was really recording some strong numbers. So the data is underpinning kind of everything United do in that sense now with transfers. Macaulay will obviously feed into that. He'll report into Vivell. So yeah, an interesting appointment. And I guess there's one way you can look at it, because some people might be their eyebrows might be raised slightly if he's followed Graham Potter around, because Graham Potter's not had the most success over the last few years.
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting as well, I suppose, that sort of going for the data model. I suppose critics may say, well, there's nothing that can be having eyes on him, just generally just watching him and seeing how they do. But it's kind of balancing the two, isn't it?
Yeah, you've obviously got to have a human watching players, and United are still doing that. They do still send scouts to the game. They do have a scouting network, but just obviously the data gives a clearer idea of what a player can offer. And in the summer, another important appointment was made with Michael Sansoni coming into the club as the director of data. He was formally announced in the summer, but I think he joined in April time, so he was in place for the summer transfer window. So Sir Jim Ratcliffe, if you remember when he spoke to Andy Mitten in the United Stand magazine, he was quite critical of the data department. He said we're still in the last century using data here, and I don't know, that might have been unfair to some extent. United obviously have used data heavily as a football club, but Ratcliffe identified that as an area for improvement. And at a time when most departments at the club are shrinking, the data department is growing. So Sansoni is overseeing that. He's spent time at Mercedes F1 team. Again, by all accounts, reportedly, he was very sought after. He'd probably been offered a few jobs before he finally decided to move to Manchester. But Sir Jim Ratcliffe got his man. Sansoni came through the door, and he's now overseeing this kind of data revolution at the club. So just interesting again. The data-led review of last season identified the attack as the biggest area for improvement, but you don't need to be a mathematician to work that out. You only needed to look at the Premier League table. United had scored 44 goals in the league. That wasn't good enough. So you didn't need to be rocket science to realise that a few more bodies were needed through the door. But nonetheless, it feeds into this wider approach of using data. And I think Sansoni had posted on LinkedIn in the summer when he spoke about meaningful progress signing in Burmo and Kuna. And I think those signings, they were obviously Premier League proven. You didn't exactly need to have a lot of data and numbers on Burmo and Kuna to sign those off. But Lommans and Sesko were younger, they were unproven, and I guess that's when the data really comes into it.
Yeah, definitely. And speaking of those younger players, there's a few more coming through the door, and we're seeing this sort of trend trying to snap up the talent before they make a name for themselves. I mean, the latest one looking to be Christian Orozco. I'll get there eventually.
You don't know who Christian Orozco is? You've not watched Christian Orozco?
I mean, I dare say my knowledge of 17-year-old Colombian wonder kids is not quite what it's meant to be, Steve. But I'm sure you're going to tell us all about him now.
Well, it's funny when I think we spoke about, I can't remember who I was on with on the podcast when this story broke a couple of months ago that United had reached a preliminary agreement to sign Roscoe, which essentially means the framework of the deal's all been agreed, but because he needs to be 18, you'll sign in the summer. And I noticed that someone in the industry who doesn't go to games, he's not part of the press pack, he's just made a kind of built a following for himself on social media, was talking at length about Christian Roscoe and his strengths and weaknesses the very next day. And I just thought, you know what, you're an absolute chancer. To sit on a video and pretend that he knows about this 17-year-old player from a far corner of the world is just absolute rubbish, isn't it? But by all accounts, again, when you look at his profile and you look at what he's achieved at just 17 years old, he could and potentially will be a good signing. And it feeds back into this approach where United are signing these younger players. We've seen it since Ineos have invested into the club for small fees with the hope of getting them to the first team. But if those signings perhaps don't go as planned, you could still sign these players for profit. And the fee for a Roscoe is around $1 million. So that is £750,000 sterling. So again, not that much money. And if Roscoe can develop into a Premier League star, then you're looking at huge upside there. I guess similar kind of when you look at Caicedo, who we just discussed. United looked at Caicedo. They passed over him because of the agent fee involved. And I think he went to Brighton for around £6 million in the end, which was a lot of money for a player of what he achieved at that point. But look at what he's done now, and obviously signed for over 100 million at Chelsea. So Brighton have probably been leading the way with their data model with these signings. So it's been interesting to see United, pardon me, kind of make a lot more of these signings over the last 18 months. Diego Leon came in the summer. Similar for Roscoe, because Diego Leon arrived in January to kind of complete his medical, and then he officially signed when he turned 18 in the summer. Sekikone, of course, who came for around £1 million as well. So, and Enzo Canabiek. So you've got to be careful when you're pronouncing these names. I want to get them right because it's disrespectful if you don't. And Canabiek is out of Le Havre. He joined from Le Havre. He's out at Lausanne on loan this season. He scored his first goal a few weeks ago. But these are all very young players with high potential. And if one is Premier League standard, if one can become a regular in the first team at United, then it's a success because they're only being signed for really low fees. Roscoe is due to arrive in Manchester over the next few days. It sounds like he's just going to have a look around with his family. I'm not quite sure. From what I've been told, that he'll complete his medical and whatnot. That might be during another trip to Manchester, but he's going to be shown around Old Trafford, I believe, Sean Carrington, just to get used to the area before he moves. And obviously next summer, he'll officially join, as I've said, when he turns 18, and he'll be given more support from there.
Yeah, definitely. And it is one of those things for United, I suppose, that it's a low spend effectively. Obviously it's eye-watering money in most regards, but for a club like Manchester United, it's such a low spend for potentially such high rewards, isn't it? And that's kind of, as you say, where Brighton have done it right, and you think it all kind of links together with Carl McCauley coming in, doesn't it?
Yeah, but it's interesting because United, like it's easier to make these signings at a club like Brighton because you've got more time. There's not as much of a spotlight, scrutiny's less. It's a less pressured environment. So they've got an opportunity to bring those signings in and kind of test them in the first team and give them first team exposure. But United, it's different. They need to sign players who are ready to hit the ground running, who are ready to compete at the top of the Premier League, because that's where this club should be. That's where the expectation is. Brighton is very different. But these players, when they have come in, you look at Diego Leon, who we briefly discussed on the last podcast. He's now playing predominantly in academy fixtures. Sekikone as well, that happened to him. So there's enough space in the academy there, and kind of the schedule's good enough for these players to come in and develop away from the spotlight. Still training with the first team, still getting used to that at Carrington in-house, but then on a match day, perhaps getting up to speed with the demands of English football and academy fixtures. And there's a few competitions where it pits academy teams against senior opposition, the National League Cup and the former Papa John's Trophy. I keep calling it the Papa John's Trophy. So these competitions are good for young players to test themselves against senior opponents. And we've seen that with Kone since he's come into the club. Obviously, recently fractured his eye socket, which is a shame, but he's back and fit now, and Diego Leon as well. But these players do need time. But as you've said, if they reach their potential, there could be a huge payoff there.
Definitely. And just before we head into the halftime break, there were some unhappy fans, not just because of the result against Everton on Monday night, due to actually getting into the ground to watch the game, wasn't there, Steve?
Yeah, I thought it was worth touching on just briefly before we kind of look ahead to Crystal Palace, because it affected quite a lot of people before the Everton game. Now, this has happened on a few occasions this season where there's been delays getting into Old Trafford. And look, I appreciate we do have listeners around the world when you look at the numbers, and this might not apply to themselves, but we have a lot of match-going fans that obviously read and digest the podcasts, etc. So it's important to kind of highlight and discuss, especially as the local paper. So there's been delays getting into the stadium at the start of the season. It was to do with the technology changing. So NFC technology is now how you get into the ground. And I think there was naturally some teething problems, especially with the older generation getting into the stadium. But there was also some confusion with stewards who were underprepared and they didn't know how to give the correct advice. And a lot of fans were sent to the ticketing office and sent back and forth. So there's a lot of happy fans before Arsenal. And then there's been a few occasions again as the season's gone on, and it seemed to happen quite a bit before Everton on Monday night. I suppose those fans who waited outside for ages would probably say they wish they hadn't actually got in at Old Trafford, as you said, because the game was absolutely shocking. The performance was so bad. But it seemed on Monday night like the stewards again were underprepared. And in terms of the actual number of stewards, I don't think there's enough stewards, particularly under the Stretford end, which seems to be where the majority of the delays were, to adequately search fans to get them into the stadium on time. So perhaps that needs to be improved. The club have kind of responded and said, look, there was no kind of looked at the queue times on Monday night, and there was nothing major standing out for a reason. But from people who I've spoken to, from what fans have said on social media, it sounds like the stewarding's the problem. Obviously, combine that with the new way of getting in. But I think supporters are now used to the new technology, and the stewarding needs to be improved.
Yeah, definitely. And it is one of those things, I suppose, when it comes, because it's such a big operation at Manchester United on match days, that a lot of stewards are brought in from other areas and they aren't necessarily going to know the ins and outs of Old Trafford, which, I mean, is not probably good enough, but it's kind of a reality of the situation, isn't it?
It's just a numbers thing. It's a quantity. I think from the people I've spoken to, I think there was around 4 stewards on W11, which is one of the turnstiles at the Stretford end, and I think there was a huge queue. And those number of stewards, that wasn't adequate to get through the number of people who were trying to get into the ground. And these aren't people rocking up 5 minutes before kickoff. By all accounts, it was 7:20, 7:15. These fans were arriving and encountering delays. So perhaps 1 or 2 extra bodies in the stewarding would make a big difference.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we'll take a break there, and when we come back, we'll be talking about the Palace game. Welcome back to the Manchester is Red podcast, and coming up this Sunday is the trip to Crystal Palace, and probably for more reasons than one, it's looking like a tricky fixture for United, isn't it?
It is. We said that earlier in the week, that Everton performance was just so bad and they need to respond, but it's going to be a tricky game because Palace are 5th in the Premier League. Only Arsenal have got a better defensive record than Palace in the league this season. Palace have conceded 9, Arsenal have conceded 6, so they're very tight at the back. And United couldn't score against the 10-man Everton on Monday night for 77 minutes, which suggests that they're going to have a tough time of things when they go down to Selhurst on Sunday. And it's a disgraceful kickoff time. You've got to feel for supporters. I've got to get the trumpet out and feel sorry for myself. I think the alarm will be set at probably around 4 a.m. on Sunday. because then the time it takes to get down, we usually report the games around 3 hours before the kick-off, so obviously we'd have to be there for 9 a.m. So to get down from Manchester to London for 9 a.m. down to Croydon, it's going to take a while. So it means a very early alarm, and supporters will be making that same trip as well. It seems very unfair. I think the game was originally penciled in for the 12:30 kickoff slot on TNT, but because Palace played on Thursday night in the Conference League against Strasbourg, so last night, the game was moved to 12. But again, I don't know how that kind of works, because surely it would help them having it's only an extra half an hour. But bottom line is it's a terrible kickoff time. But that actually should give United advantage, the fact that Palace have played on Thursday night. United were obviously last in action on Monday night, so they've had 6 days to prepare. They will have 6 days to prepare for this match. Palace, I looked at the lineup, and I think around 8 players who started in France on Thursday night will probably start. Adam Wharton was rested. He was brought on, though he still played. Mark Gay was playing. That they had a lot of their best players on the pitch, with the exception of a few. So the majority of Palace's starting team that you'd expect to play against United on Sunday were in action. They'll recover on Friday, which is obviously we're recording the podcast today. They might even just have a recovery day on Saturday. I'm not even sure they'll train on Saturday. They might have a very light training session. But United have clearly got a freshness advantage there, and they've got to make it count. There's no excuses not to get a result on Sunday. And when you look at October and how positive it was, Ruben Amorim was named Manager of the Month. Sunderland, Liverpool, Brighton, all very good performances. We discussed that November started not as Amorim would have wanted, with 2 draws. And then Everton was a setback. And all of a sudden, the very good work of October is in danger of being undone, because if United now end the month with back-to-back defeats and they've started the month with 2 draws, it's a very bad November after a very good October. So they need to get a result on Sunday. I know we say that ahead of every game, and every game always feels big with United because of what's at stake and the pressure and the scrutiny. But Sunday is a big match. They need to respond, especially after Everton, because if they don't, fingers will be pointed at Amorim again, rightly or wrongly. After such a positive spell, to have regressed and to potentially have lost 2 back-to-back games after such a positive period would be incredibly disappointing. So Amorim will be desperate for 3 points on Sunday.
Yeah, definitely. And it'll be a case of both teams playing the similar formation. There's not many teams who play that similar style as Amorim, but both teams most likely going to line up in that 3-2-4-1 system. And it'll be interesting, I think, from a United perspective, to see how they line up and how they can impose their style on Palace, who are going to try and match them up.
Yeah, it's always interesting when a team has the same formation. Glasner's done a wonderful job at Selhurst since his arrival from Frankfurt. Probably one of the best managers in the league. He will do his research, I think, after the Manchester City game. I can't remember which Palace player had said it, but he'd praised Glasner for giving them all the solutions ahead of the match. So a very tactically astute manager, and it's going to be a difficult game. And United have got a very poor record against Palace in the last 18 months or so. They haven't won in the last 4 games, and they haven't scored in the last 4 games against Palace. So Palace had won 2-0 at Old Trafford last season, then it was 0-0 at Selhurst. I was down for that game. Onana made that double save. Then Palace had won 4-0 the season before that, and they beat United 1-0 at Old Trafford. So you have to go back to the League Cup win at Old Trafford, which was in 2023, to find a United win against Palace. So the recent performances haven't been good enough against them. And as I say, United need to respond after that Everton game, because it was shocking.
Yeah, definitely. And they could be helped, though, in their cause by a couple of returns. Obviously, we're speaking before the press conference, but Mateus Cunha and Harry Maguire just missed out on Monday night. Any chances, how do we think, of either man or both being available for the trip?
I'd personally start them both if they're both fit and available. Amorim will speak around 1:15 today. Embargo's 1:30, so keep an eye. Well, the podcast will already be out by then, won't it? By the time you're listening to this, so you'll already know. But I'd expect Cunha, I think, to be available. It was described as a minor issue last weekend, which forced them to miss the Altrincham Christmas lights switch on, unfortunately. For
the big event of the weekend.
The big event of the year. Massive, wasn't it? So, yeah, I'd expect him to come back into the side. Maguire, I suppose there's a few more question marks because it was a hamstring injury that he was brought off with against Tottenham. He's obviously been out with that problem, and with a hamstring problem, you never know. It's a bit more serious. You've got to carefully handle these players to prevent a repeat. Maguire's been quite unlucky actually with injuries. I think he'd had quite a decent record of being always available, really. Obviously, he's picked up a few during his time at the club, but it was generally pretty decent. And the last few international breaks, there seemed to be a few little problems. And I think if he hadn't have picked up these little niggly injuries, then he would have played himself back into the England squad, because when he has played, he's actually contributed a lot and he's looked pretty good. So his contract obviously expires at the end of the season. I'd be in favour of offering him a new deal. Talks are underway. Matt Hargreaves is the director of negotiations. He handles all of that. So he is speaking to Maguire's representatives over a new contract. And as I've said, I'm in favour of not giving Casemiro a new deal and extending Maguire's deal. Casemiro earns more. Would he be willing to take such a pay cut? I'm not sure. His role in the squad would change, but I think Maguire, as a year younger, he earns less, and I don't think his role in the squad would change too much. I think he'd still be in a pretty similar situation where he's definitely good enough to be starting or putting pressure on whoever is starting. But if he's back, if he is fit, I'd start him at Selhurst purely because Lenny Yoro had a bit of a difficult game last weekend on Monday. And it's interesting with Yoro. I made this point at the start of this season that he could actually be better on the left side of the defence. He's played predominantly on the right this season, but if you think back to last spring, Yoro was operating on the left side and delivered some really good performances. And if you watch the replay back of Kieran Dewsbury-Hall's goal on Monday night, Yoro, with his body, although he is right-footed, and it made sense to go in with his right foot, he stretched across and tried to do it with his left. So that was interesting. And in a previous interview, he has said that he really enjoyed playing on the left, and although he is right-footed, he thought he was pretty good on that side. So it's just one to be factored in. Of course, Luke Shaw is playing on the left side of the defence, but Yoro could be an option on that side. Could it be Yoro on the left, Maguire and Delay as the back three? That might be an option if Luke Shaw picks up an injury. Yeah,
and it's once again, we always say it, but the defence looks so strong on paper, doesn't it? And then you look at how many goals United have conceded, and you feel like that's the area that needs improving. It's quite we say it pretty much every week, but it's such a conundrum, isn't it, for United?
Keep Mateta quiet on Sunday. That's what they've got to do. Bit of an old school striker. I don't think I can deal with hearing the boom, 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 boom coming through it. I'll be very tired after a very early start. I don't want to hear that music blasting out in my face. Mateta he's a great story, to be fair, because of the kind of career he's had and the form that he's hit. And it's not just being a purple patch. He's managed to sustain it. He now looks like a very decent Premier League striker. That's not to say I think United will link with him in the last summer transfer window, and I wouldn't have gone that far to say they should have explored potential interest there. But for the club he's at, I think he's a very good striker for Crystal Palace. They'll be desperate to keep a hold of him.
Yeah, definitely. And just before we finish, we've said it before as well that United's main aim should be to qualify for the Champions League. Obviously, after October, we were a bit more confident that that's something that they could possibly do. It's sort of stalled a bit in November. Do you think that's still a realistic opportunity for United? Obviously, they'll go above Palace if they win. We don't really know how the Premier League table will look, but you'd imagine they'll be knocking on the door of the top four again if they can win on Sunday.
Yeah, the Premier League table is so tight, isn't it? I mean, Aston Villa are in fourth, and they're on 21 points after a very good turnaround, because let's not forget they had a poor start of the season. Everton are 11th, and they're on 18 points. So 11th are just 3 points adrift of fourth. It's so tight in the top half. As the winter goes on and we get into January, gaps should start to widen between certain teams, I believe. I think the top three, City, Chelsea and Arsenal, will probably start to put a bit of distance between themselves and the rest of the league, I'd imagine. But United have to get up there. They have to keep pace with those clubs, and that means being consistent. We saw in October where they secured 3 wins on the bounce, but then, as we've just said, November's been disappointing so far. So they really need to get back on the right track against Palace, and they need to be consistent. You need to have spells where you're undefeated in 3, maybe 2 wins and a draw, and you can't be losing 1 and 2 every time, because you're just not going to build the momentum and the consistency that'll take you into the Champions League. And we've discussed the defensive record that needs improvement, but also obviously the consistency needs to improve. The big areas for Amorim to solve if he wants to secure Champions League football this season. United have privately said that Europe is the target. They haven't said it's the Champions League. They've said it's Europe. But this club has to be in the Champions League. Europa League would be disappointing, especially with having no European football this season. That is a big advantage. Just look at Sunday's game. Palace have got 2 days to prepare. United have got 6. They should be beating Crystal Palace. There's no excuse. So, but again, there was no excuse on Monday. Those are the matches they have to be winning against a 10-man Everton side. So that was really disappointing, and we were very critical, rightly so, in the aftermath. A lot's been said this week, so it's time for the players to go out there on Sunday and produce a response. It'll be interesting to see how the game develops, really, because of Palace playing on Thursday night. But they are a decent side, and Glasner has them very well drilled.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that's full time on the Manchester is Red podcast. Thank you, Steven Railston, for all your insights on everything on and off the pitch at Old Trafford. You can follow all of the coverage on the Manchester Evening News across the weekend. But until then, we'll catch you next time.